There are 1,000 stories in the Envisioner's future. This is just one of them. Hey, how the devil are we all? Dave Coplin here with another Rise of the Humans live stream. Can it really be a week already? I find the days are flying by, and we've all done the jokes about not knowing which day is which, but I'm telling you now, it's Wednesday, it's 6 o'clock, and I am so glad you could join us. So we've got the usual array of things for you. We've got a quick look at the news. We're going to spend some time talking to you about the road ahead, and in particular, what I think is going to be a long road ahead about how we chart our way back into the office. It's also a really special day, and this is really nerdy of me, but actually is 29 years to the day since the launch of Macintosh System 7. There is a bit of trivia that you probably never wanted to know, but I'm telling you now, it's also Simon's birthday, so happy birthday, Simon. And what's important about Macintosh System 7 for me is it really marks the beginning of the journey of the rise of the humans, because it was for the first time when personal computers became truly accessible for people. They were something that actually normal everyday people, not just nerds like me, could engage with. And so I thought it would be quite nice that we'd be broadcasting today on such a special day in the calendar. And today, of course, we have been joined by another guest, and I am absolutely thrilled to have Mr. Gary Burt back in the room with us. How are you doing, Gary?
Hello, Dave. Here we go again. Another day working from home.
No, absolutely. And with hopefully good audio and good video this time, so we'll see how we get on.
Excellent.
Right, so moving on swiftly. This week there isn't a workshop because guess what? Actually, I've been a bit busy, and I've been busy doing some great things. First is that there was an event we did yesterday for Log Me In, which you should be able to see the post stream on. I'll send a link out to that soon. And then this is something that's coming up. Actually, really thrilled to be able to talk about this. But last summer I did the Cheltenham Science Festival. That put me in touch with a whole group of people, and in particular this lovely bunch of people, the Cosmic Shambles team, who are essentially my extended nerd family, and I did a really fantastic gig with them, 9 lessons for curious people over Christmas. They've been running this amazing program of content since lockdown began at the end of March, every day going out with a stay-at-home festival hosted pretty much always by Robin Ince, a whole range of different people coming on talking about science, the arts, but mostly science. There's some comedy in there, and I'm thrilled to announce that at some point I'm going to be visiting them too. It was going to be Friday, but they're being moving around with the schedule. So talking of events, here's another one I just wanted to bring to your attention. There's one coming up on June the 4th, and the joy about this is working with clients who actually want to do something a bit different. So they contacted me wanting to do a webinar. Webinars are lovely, as we know, but they can be a bit dull. So I said, well, look, webinars are great. Could we do something different? And to their credit, they have emerged on this great journey, which here's the invitation that we recorded earlier this week. Hi, Dave Coplin here with news of a fantastic new webinar coming to you on June the 4th, brought to you by the brilliant folks from Tealium, all about data. Well, of course it's about data, everything's about data, but this is really about how crucial data is going to be to all of us if we really want to anticipate where our customers or employees are going to be and how they're going to be thinking, the kind of things that we're going to need to do to live up to their expectations as we all emerge into this post-pandemic new normal. Now, I know what you're thinking, right? It's a webinar, and we all know from time to time some webinars can be a little bit dull. But this isn't one of those webinars. This isn't a webinar that you turn up to and end up checking out your email halfway through. This isn't even a webinar that you end up looking at on the post stream. Oh no, this is an event that you're going to want to be part of on the day, because it won't just be me. Joining me will be a fabulous panel of experts. We'll have Laura McHenry from Tealium. How you doing, Laura? We'll have Adrian Smith from Barclays. Adrian, glad you could join us. And we'll be joined by the ever effervescent Jazz Sidhu. And we're going to be here talking about data, the new normal, and how we can get in front of it. We'd love for you to be part of the conversation. It's June the 4th. There's the link where you can register. We'd love to see you there. would help if we enabled the mute. So all I was telling you there, and in a way that was gesticulating, that probably looked really emotional and very engrossing, was all about how I'd love you to be part of this event, because what we're trying to do is to not do just another bloody webinar. We don't want to be the event where somebody's just sitting there reading the slides and you're doing your email. It's really about a bit like this, trying to engage with the audience and making sure that we're together and doing things that can make a difference when we're not connected in the way that we'd like to be. So without further ado, let's get stuck into the meat of today's conversation about the longer road. And it started, actually, this brilliant cartoon from a guy called Shannon Wheeler, actually, came from Wired, but it was Gary who posted it. It really caught my attention about this sort of view of your living rooms. And I wonder how many of you have got a living room or an office or a spare room that is exactly in this state. I tell you, mine would be if it wasn't for the fact that I've cheated and stuck a green screen in. So actually all I do is I shove all of my stuff behind the green screen. But we're in this amazing experience now, and we're sitting in there and we're thinking about, you know, what is it that we're going to do? We're already having conversations about how do we return to the office, and we are in a situation where we're planning things out. We've got people looking at different scenarios. But for me, I think it's a lot more than that, and that's why we talk about the road back to the office. But actually, this is such a long road. If you look at what people are talking about in terms of social distancing, they're talking about social distancing measures being in place for another 12 months over in some way, shape or form. And then there's the other side of it, which is the spectrum of how we all feel about the situation. And I know that there are those of you who are desperate to go back to the office. There are those of you who may be at the other end of the spectrum who are desperate not to go back to the office, or are fearful of having to go through the commute to get into the office. And this is a time where organizations, I think, need to be really thoughtful about what their approach needs to be. And not just from a health and safety perspective, but we've been given this gift now, a gift in which people understand truly what it means to work remotely. We've worked out, you know, some of the kinks. And interestingly, I'd be interested to hear from some of you in the audience. I also think we're reaching the end of the honeymoon with the remote working as well. It was fine for a while, but now we are getting a bit stressed out, and we're on virtual meetings all the time, and maybe we don't do a great job. You know, one of the things I think we miss about the commute, we talked about this last week, was that ability to switch off. I have some time to decompress between work and the office. So what are we going to do, and how are we really going to address that? And that's really where I want to bring Gary in before we start going to the news. And talk. We'll go to the first sort of news article, actually, because I think it sets the tone really rather well. And this takes me back to my time at Microsoft, when we were doing a lot of work about the future of work, and, you know, what Microsoft could do to enable the future of work. What really, you know, if Microsoft could do one thing, what would Microsoft do to enable a better future of work? And the best bit was actually the majority of the answers that we got were not about more collaborative tools or different interfaces. They were simply like, just get rid of reply all. So when I saw this article the other day, this is Microsoft killing one of the most annoying working from home email habits. It's actually a bit clickbaity because it's not about working from home at all. It's not as good as I was hoping. They're not getting rid of reply all, but they are actually implementing a new feature to basically prevent it. It basically triggers, once it sees an email list of a certain size being replied a certain number of times, it kills the thread. So Gary, let me just bring you in there. Email storms ever been a problem for you?
Ever? That would make you think that it was over. It isn't. I think, obviously one of the things about people working from home is they're sending more emails. They're sending more work. They're doing reply all, because we can't have those quick conversations and we can't see anybody. So what we're doing, we're making sure everybody knows. So we copy everybody in and we kill everybody's productivity. It's temporary though. We will get past it because we will learn, we will evolve, and we will make those changes to become more productive as a remote organization. But I guess for people who are seeing that increase in email, it's about learning what changes you need to make in that new environment to make it work. Tell people, I don't need to be copied on everything. But it's also about having that dialogue internally and developing a discipline. But this actually brings me back to something we talked about a couple of weeks ago, which is that about trust. we copy people in because we want to be seen, because we don't want to risk missing them out. And it all comes back to trust. When we define what trust is, look, send me the emails I need to see. I trust you that I don't need to see everything. And I think it's about slowly redefining what trust means in a distributed remote workforce. When we crack that, the reply all problem will disappear.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I love that you sort of brought trust into this, because I think if we're going to get any kind of sort of strategic way forward out of all of this, trust has to be at the heart. And again, we talked about this last week as well. And it's the whole concept of trust. You know, it's not just about between the employer and the employee. It's actually between your peers. It's between the employees. And let's just hold that thought on trust. I want to just bring back another sort of news article, less a news article, more sort of, I guess, an official statistics release. And we've got another one coming tomorrow. But this is the ONS releasing, I guess, their indicators for how the economy's changing and society's changing as a result of coronavirus. And buried in this was a lovely little stat that I just happened to see on the news as I walked through the kitchen last night. And I just thought it was amazing. And if I can find it, it basically says that, of course, I can't bloody find it now, 44% of the UK population, there we go, working from home. So 44% of the UK working population are currently working from home. And that's just astounding. I mean, absolutely astounding that we would have got to that portion. And for me, I think what we've got to be really thoughtful about now is, what do we want that number to be? What do we think that number should be? And, you know, I'm going to be massively clickbaity here. You know, one of the things I would love to be able to do over the coming weeks is build an argument that prevents people from going back to the office. Now, of course, I don't mean that in for eternity, but what I do mean is this change in your default behavior. And we've talked about this. You know, if you imagine pre-corona, our default behavior was that, do you know what, in my default position, I go into the office Monday to Friday, or even Monday to Thursday, and maybe one day a week I'll work from home. That's my default. That's what I do. I think we've got an opportunity now to flip that around and say, do you know what, my default is I don't go into the office. Now, there's lots of different sort of layers of arguments here. This isn't about staying at home all the time. This isn't about, you know, being locked inside our homes. It's also not about never going out, but it's about not having to feel that we have to go and sit inside the container of our organization in order to be able to work. We should be spending more time out with our clients or with our peers, or rather than just going into the office. And so for me, you know, I would love to see this number stay where it is. I don't know, Gary, what do you feel about sort of creating that as the default position?
It's really interesting. I'll give you a good perspective on this. I changed to where I work for now last July, and you know, I like many people, I'd had calls before. I'm on LinkedIn. You're going to get calls about, where do you want to work? Are you interested in this? But you know, you get a call from an opportunity, and they go, right, and I live in the north. Where's it based? Central London. Okay, that's not a problem. I can be in central London within 2.5 hours of leaving my home. That's not an issue. Okay, well, they want you there 5 days a week. Why? You know, I don't need to be there 5 days a week. Why do they want me there 5 days a week? And I think when you start to examine this, it really opens up a lot of conversations about the culture of the organization, but also how customer centric it is. Well, and the conversation, well, if you're not in the office, where would you be? Well, I'd be either at home, head down, getting some work done, or collaborating with people virtually, because the team that I work with isn't in London, it's globally. They're people all over the world. Or I'd be with customers. So I think it is, in some industries, it is happening that we are doing the default to remote, because actually it isn't taking us away from customers. It's meaning that we're available, that time that we do have to travel becomes much more valuable and much more focused on being there to work with customers, there to travel to people who want to do it. And it's coming. It's coming. Coronavirus has given us a really big wake-up call in terms of what's possible. You're absolutely right. But I think it's going to continue, these changes that we see, we will go back a bit. It's not going to completely flip flop, but we are going to evolve from where we are, and that's going to be the big shift. So I think a lot of the changes that we see, we're not going to go back to the old world, but we won't go to what we're now seeing. We're in a state of transition to a new, as is often said, it's cliche now, a new normal. But I think a lot of those questions that maybe people weren't feeling confident enough, weren't feeling brave enough, didn't feel experienced or empowered enough to ask, they are now going to be asking them, why do I have to come in on a Friday? It takes me 2 hours each way. Why am I coming in every Friday? It makes no sense.
But this will be huge to a number of people, and it's easy to play to stereotypes, but I think if you look at a lot of the small to medium-sized businesses, these are typically organizations who may or may not be dealing well with the concept of working from home. And I would imagine now they're looking at the government advice saying the offices are opening, and they're busy preparing to open their offices. And what advice do you think we could give to those people to help them find the right balance for them and their organisation? And I'm not trying to prescribe anything to anybody other than a process by which you can find the right answer that fits the culture of your organisation. How best do you think we could help them, Gary?
I think the first thing is organisations have to have an open dialogue with the people who are working for them. They are the assets of the organisation. Start that dialogue. Start to uncover those fears. Start to uncover those blockers. Because if you come out with a policy thinking you're going to get it right, we know that for the amount of people who love working from home, there's an equal number who really want to go back into the office. Your policy is either going to be wrong or somewhere in the middle, and risks being wishy-washy. Instead, engage with people, understand what they want, understand their fears, and understand how you don't go from A to B, but how you evolve to define what your new culture needs to be. What is it you want to be? There's no rule that says these, when we go back, these are the new rules. If you're a small business owner, a medium business owner, this is your world to create. Create the environment that is going to have your people posting and telling their friends about how great your company is.
I think your point about engagement is really, really crucial, isn't it? Because again, if you go back to before all of this, one of the big challenges around remote working was the sense of parity, of equal sort of rights to work from home. And it always made me laugh because most organizations, they have a really open remote working policy, and it's applied to everybody. It's just that different people are in different situations and would choose to activate that policy in different levels. And over time, you would get this sort of disruption. We saw it in our research, and I was using myself as the example because I would be the guy who would, barely in the office. And everyone's like, well, how come Dave never comes in? How's his patio coming on? And in reality, it was just, you've got as much right as I have to not be in the office. It's just I'm choosing to use it maybe a bit more than other people. But the only way I think you solve the parity issue, and it speaks to your trust, is that if people are engaged in a dialogue about what's going to work. And what's been interesting is the schools, actually, watching the schools deal with the conversation around primary schools going back in June. And what I've seen a lot of is schools, rather than saying, right, so we're going back in June, they're saying, do you know what? We get what you're saying, but we're going to ask the parents. We're going to ask the parents how they feel. Because again, you can imagine you're going to have this spectrum of people who are, desperate to get their kids back into school because they need to go and work, or people who are fearful of the risk that not just it puts their kids at, but it puts the family at in terms of having that increased exposure. But the only way through that is if we talk to each other, is that engagement. And so I think that has to be the first port of call for everybody, is to think about what does this actually need to look like. I think the challenge there is who should be having that conversation in the business? Is it the CFO? Is it the office manager? Is it the CEO? Who do you think needs to be driving that?
It needs to come from the top. It might be led by the head of HR, the personnel manager, divisional managers. The guidelines for what's going to be acceptable in the culture need to be set from the very top. This needs to be the CEO. It doesn't need to be, or the owner or the managing director. It doesn't need to be driven actively by them. What they do need to do, though, is very clearly define what is acceptable. Because if you have we're going to have a consultation, but the MD, the CEO, has already said, I can't wait to see people back in the office on the phones, getting to the customers. You're not going to have a consultation. What you're doing is you're telling people they're not going to reply. If you start this with the right objective and say, our business needs to be here for the long term, that means we need to keep people and we need to keep our customers. Help us get this right, because we don't know. Nobody knows. So let's have that dialogue about what type of company we want to be and how do we make it work for everybody. Because for some of the roles, they are going to need to be there. So I'm really lucky. I can have a camera and a light and it can work for me. Many is the time I wish I was a mechanic. If you're a mechanic, how do you make that work? But even then, you can start to have that dialogue about how you create an environment that's going to be attractive, safe, and isn't going to make people fearful of making those changes. And everybody needs to be engaged in that.
Yeah, I think there's a baby in the bathwater here as well, right? Because I think and it was always the problem whenever you talk about flexible working, remote working, everybody always assumes it's like this binary thing, like we're going to do it forever and never go into the office, or we're not going to do it at all. But there is this balance that needs to be struck. And I think one of the things and it's why I was, beginning was talking about, some of the honeymoon with this remote working being over, is because there's an important element of our social connection that is lost in this, even in the end-to-end, back-to-back Zoom meeting lifestyle that we now mostly live. There's those chance sort of meetings, walking down the corridor or at the water cooler, stereotype. And Rob McCargo actually was talking about this on Twitter today, and I thought it was bang on, is how can you find a way of creating that social serendipity of connection of people in what you're doing in this remote world. And I think it's like anything, you can't just say you should be social, but I think it's for people as part of their plan, as part of how they go forward from here, to build that informal connection in as much as anything else.
Yeah, I think, a couple of practical ones is again to state that that's okay. Working from home can be really draining. So, and we know that there are a lot of positives from working with people and being communicated, but that doesn't necessarily need to be that you're doing that in the office. It could be that if two people need to travel, they don't need to travel to the office. They can meet in a Starbucks nearby. They can socially distance around a table. They can go and sit in the park. Redefine what collaboration means. I think there's I saw something the other day saying that that remote working is going to herald a massive change in the demand for buildings, the demand for rents, the demand for offices. That's partly true, but what it will really drive is a change in demand for the type of spaces that we have. Offices will evolve, and they already are in some organizations, from being places where you go to do work to places where you intentionally go to collaborate. I mean, WeWork is partly there, but if you think of a default to empowered, let's not say mobile, but you default to the person having the choice. Well, why would you go into the office? Yeah. Well, you're going in for human contact. So that environment, that physical environment, is going to change and evolve. You're not going to have a room full of offices where people can sit down and crank on at the desk. You're going to have an office full of meeting spaces.
Yeah, and I'd love to see the geography of this change. It's funny because my dad's been talking about this for ages, and I used to live it in the sense that, so I live, in Banbury, about an hour away from London, and when I commute into London, I go and stand on the platform, and with me on the platform are another 200 or 300 people who are doing like I am. They're going in, they're traveling probably 2 hours door to door to go and sit in a glass building somewhere, looking at the same bit of glass and plastic that they could be looking at home. And while it's not so much about, working from home, we should have access to a whole range of workspaces that would enable, in my commuter town, me to go into that town. I don't have to go into London, but I could go into town. I could sit in a space. I would have access to all of the, things that I would have in an office. And actually also, and this again was something that we found in the research back when we were doing the books, is the opportunity of making spurious connections and that kind of serendipity of meeting with people who aren't in your industry, who aren't from your company, but might have something to offer in terms of value, even if it's just a conversation over a coffee. And I get all the social distancing and we'll figure all that sort of stuff. But this concept of not having to travel long distances just to sit inside a physical container, that has to be quite appealing, right?
I think it does. The best examples these are in London, because there often is a regional element to this. They are in tight conurbations. The best WeWork offices do have this. They have that thriving energy. You go there, you want to immerse in, and then actually when you want to get some work done, you actually go out to a remote office or you go back home. And I know for years we heard them referred to as third spaces. This third space. I hope that. And that space can be within an organization. It doesn't need to be a separate one, but it could be. But again, what starts to break down is this concept of either you're home in your own little office, or you go to work and you're in another private closed building. Yeah. And actually, if we're learning anything, it's the point of traveling is to collaborate and communicate. So we will see a new evolution of those offices to become more social spaces.
Yeah. So we've got a few minutes left, Gary, and the thing that I really wanted to also get to was this whole concept around scenario planning, because I think one of the things that we've got to be thoughtful, there's so many dimensions for the challenge, right? So the dimension is, how do we become a more flexible organization? And just while I remember, just to give you some examples of that, so Facebook and Google have gone on record saying that they're going to extend home working till the end of the year. Twitter today or yesterday have announced that they're going to do this forever, and I thought it was a really, really interesting thing. So all right, we've got the the trendy techie companies doing things, and of course they can do that because they're trendy techie companies. But so we have to think about how do we enable people working from home. But secondly, how do we do this in a way that is, in a sense, elastic? What if there's another, what if we go backwards in terms of the pandemic and we end up with another lockdown situation? How are we going to be able to respond to that? So I think this element of scenario planning becomes really crucial to organizations. Again, Gary, what would you advise for that? If I'm an organization, I'm thinking about that. What was the best approach to sort of mapping those things out?
So scenario planning is, it has a very technical name for actually something that is quite a straightforward, simple concept. It is, let's look at all the things that could possibly happen and then determine how prepared we would be for these. And the key with scenario planning is you need to cast a wide net. So when you think about what could happen to our business, there aren't too many organizations that would have said, what we need to do is we need to look at maybe a global pandemic and locking down organizations and see how we're going to be if the whole world has to work from home. But with scenario planning, it is really important you cast those wide nets. So if you've not done it before, there's a lot of material on this. There's some great books out there. Go to Amazon, see what people are recommending on scenario planning, scenario workshops. They're good. But the second thing is, don't be afraid to do this. The key thing to make scenario planning work and to make it really valuable is, one, it must be broad. You must be looking at the unexpected. You need to look at what Nassim Nicholas Taleb called the black swans. What are those really unexpected events that could absolutely derail you? This is what scenario planning is about. How do you think of the unthinkable? And then how do you work back from there to understand how you can not stop it happening, but reduce the risk of it being catastrophic?
And you've got to think, inside most organizations, and I would bet, especially in the finance department right now, there's already a bunch of people, probably led by the CFO, that have already run through at least 10 different scenarios for what's happened. I mean, certainly the organizations that I've been involved in, I mean, the CFO in particular is probably the most stressed right now because they are simply running the numbers on everything. But you've got to think that there's an opportunity there for them to help other people with those scenarios, and easily vice versa, to bring them to them in terms of what they could be planning for, that might give them different sort of ways of looking at what might happen.
No, definitely. Scenario planning works really well when you start to bring in other people as well. The worst thing you can do if you wanted to do scenario planning is have the board members disappear into a room and think that they can do it alone. The best thing you could do is have diversity in that room. Bring people from other organizations in. Bring your customers in. Bring people from, from what we would have called the shop floor. If you're a big organization, bring people who are right on the front line of the customer into that planning session. Encourage that debate, encourage that discussion, because it's the thing which is going to catch you is not what you can say, it's those outliers, and they are going to come from outlier thinkers, outlier voices, and that's what you need to include. So it needs to be a really, scenario planning is often done in really tight groups because it's really, really confidential, and we really, really can't talk about it. Not pointing to recent events and maybe scenarios that were done in the past, which brings us on to the second point. We're not going to get political. No, but this second point, and this is the really hard thing. Once you've done the scenario planning, you need to work through that and put some risk analysis against this. If you can see catastrophic events that could really derail your business, and this is not about global supply chains. This is about, if you're a business and you can be derailed by what you found, what practical steps can you take that is not going to break the bank, that allows you to be able to manage that without it becoming catastrophic. It's not that, hey, this could happen and we'll really profit. That's not what it's about. It's about understanding, what is it that could, seriously, it might be a really small chance. What is it that could happen and kill us as a company? It would kill us dead. We couldn't respond. Now, what can we do not to be able to prosper? That's a very different scenario, and that's going to take a lot of money. But what can we do to allow us to continue to operate as a business? Because a lot of go on Amazon and try and buy a webcam, a decent webcam. Impossible. You can't buy them in the country. Try and buy, as we know, try and buy some encoding kit. Try and buy some home video kit. It's near impossible. If you'd have looked at what would have happened and what could happen, well, people might be forced to work from home. That's not an outlier scenario. That's one that would have been a real core center scenario. Okay, so if that was the case, what would we want to do? Well, we'd want to make sure people could communicate effectively. In order to do that, they're going to need some decent kit. Now, that decent kit 4 months ago was really not expensive, easily accessible. But if you'd have been through this, you'd have spent even per person 150 quid on a really good mic and a top webcam. You'd be hard pressed to spend 10 times that amount and get the same kit now. No, it's not going to happen. So I think there are real lessons, and this isn't, scenario planning. You do it. We do it every day. When we save money for a rainy day, because we might lose our job, we don't think we will, but we know we need a couple of months of money put aside if we can do that. We know that we need to keep a couple of days' food or weeks' food or some rice in, before the stockpiling. But we need to keep a bit of food in because if we get a bit ill, and actually we're going to keep some hay fever tablets in because Aldi or Boots might sell out. That's what you're doing. What you need to do then is start to do that at a business level. What could happen? What are the simple things that I can do to provide some insulation against this so it doesn't become catastrophic? That's all it is. And if we did that, we'd leave businesses in a much more robust place.
But the difference in what you said, Gary, and I think it's important just to bring it out as part of the summary, is, organizations have been doing risk management and risk assessment forever, right? It's part of the audit, and the audit committee go through it and blah, blah, blah. And it's all important. I get it. The difference in what you're saying, I think, and it's two words, it's the engagement and it's the diversity of the team that are involved in doing it. And I think if we left today there, that is the point for me, is if you're in an organization and you're planning this, if you are an employee and you know it's going on, you need to go and talk to them. If you are running this, you need to make sure you have a really representative sample of the people that you care about most. And that won't just be your employees. And I think you made a really valid point there, Gary, about getting, customers and partners and suppliers involved in this, because they're in the same bloody boat as well. I think that's it. And I think that's crucial. So on that note, go on, Gary.
Be diverse. There is no downside to inclusivity. Yeah, there isn't.
Totally. And on that,
the worst you're going to do is spend a little bit more time.
Yeah, no, exactly. And what, be better informed? How terrible would that be, right? So Anyway, listen, I'm going to leave it there because we're over time. Thank you so much again for joining us. It's been brilliant to have you with us. And I know that we're on this journey and we're trying to get the content right and the engagement right. So we'd love to hear more from you about what you'd like to see, hear more of your voice in the conversation as well. We'll be back hopefully with some more workshops soon as well. So we'll bring some of that element into it. But for the meantime, it all just leaves with me to say thanks so much. And thanks, Gary. Thanks for being with us once again.
Thanks, Dave.
And for me, just to say thank you so much. We would love you to subscribe. If you haven't already, you know how to do that. You just click the button below. I will, after the show, post the links that we've used and the timestamps, all that sort of stuff. Stay safe, stay healthy, and hopefully we will see you all again next week. Thanks so much, guys.
There are 1,000 stories in the Envisioner's future. This is just one of them.